Hello everyone, this is the video of Legal Studies, Class 12, Unit 2, Topic 1, that is Law of Property, and the subtopic is Sale. So in this video, we will be discussing about the concept of sale, essential features of a valid sale, duties and liabilities of seller, duties and liabilities of buyer, rights of buyer and rights of seller. And in the last, we will be also discussing one of the cases. So let's begin with the first, that is meaning of sale. So what do you understand by the meaning of sale? Check out what is the definition. As per the section 54 of Transfer of Property Act, sale is a transfer of ownership in exchange of a price, usually money, paid or promised, or part paid and part promised. So I believe this is simple definition. However, lastly you may confused because of some confusing words, but don't worry. It is saying that transfer of ownership in exchange of price, and that is usually money. That price either fully paid or partially paid or partially promised or fully promised. Promised here means I will pay you on so and so date. I will pay this amount on so and so date. So this is like that. So not essentially paid just now all the money, but I may pay later. So that is the meaning of sale. That is basically transfer of ownership. Seller is the person who transfers the property, and buyer is the person to whom the property is transferred. So I believe these two terms are simple for you, that is seller and buyer. The consideration in a sale usually money. Sale of immovable property can be made by a registered deed if the value of rupees 100. We have already studied this in my previous video or above. Delivery of the property takes place when the buyer is placed in possession of the property. What does it mean? That once you sold out your property and the possession of that property also given. So that possession is known as technically delivery of the property. Now the next point is, what are the essential features of a valid sale? There should be two different parties, one is buyer and one is seller. Both the parties should be competent to transfer, means seller as well as buyer, as we have already studied that who is competent to transfer the property. Remember, one who is major means 18 and plus of age and of sound mind, keep in mind. So he is a competent. Even not only the seller but also buyer, both of them have to be major, not minor, as minor is not allowed to transfer the property. Next one is, the property to be transferred should be in existence. What does it mean? That the property that you are going to sell or transfer, that has to be in existence. Means it's not like that you are just creating some property in the air and just selling out that property, which really doesn't exist. So it must be existing property. Next one is, consideration for the transfer should be money. Usually it is money. The contract should be in accordance with the law. The contract should be in accordance with the law. What does it mean? That whatever the contract and terms and conditions of your contract is, it has to be under the purview of law. You shouldn't be something like making any such terms and conditions which is legally not possible. So that is not allowed. Now the next point is, what are the duties or liabilities of a seller? The seller is bound to disclose the buyer and material defect in the property which the seller is aware and which cannot be discovered with ordinary care by the buyer, otherwise it becomes fraudulent. So suppose if you are selling a property, imagine you are selling your car, and if your car has certain minor defects that cannot be easily discovered, then it is your liability to inform the buyer that this car has this problem. Otherwise, if you hide it, then it is considered as fraudulent act. Next point is to produce to the buyer all documents of title relating to the property. So whatever the document you have regarding the property, that property going to be sold. So you have to present all those documents of that property. Next one is to answer all relevant questions relating to the title, etc. of the property. So buyer might have certain questions, so you need to answer all those questions. To execute a sale deed when the buyer renders the price. What does it mean? That once the buyer paid the money, then the sale has to be executed. To take care of the property from the date of agreement until the date of the sale. What does it mean? That once you start discussing about the selling the property and agreement almost fixed, so since that time until you actually transfer the property to the buyer, it is your responsibility to take care of the property in the same condition, or basically to maintain the property in the same condition as you have shown to that buyer. Okay, so it has to be in actual condition. Next point is to give possession to the buyer. Of course, when the buyer paid you the money, you need to give the possession of that property to that buyer. To pay all public charges and rents due up to the date of the sale. Means whatever the property tax and other taxes there might be, so you need to pay first before selling that property. He should also discharge encumbrances. So encumbrances, we have already seen that this term. So there shouldn't be any problem of any sort or any liability with that property. If it is, then it has to be first completed all those liabilities. However, if there is terms and conditions of such type you made under the agreement, then there is okay, no problem. The last point of this heading is when the sale price is fully paid, the seller is bound to deliver all the documents of title to the buyer. So once the buyer paid you all the money, then along with the possession, you also need to pay all the relevant document in respect of that property. We have discussed the duties and liabilities of a seller. Now check out what are the rights of a seller. Collect the rents and profits of the property till the ownership passes to the buyer. What does it mean? That see, if you want to sell your apartment and that is on rent, so until the registry is done, you received all the amount that is discussed of that property, till then it is your right to take the rent. Once you have given the possession after receiving the total amount, then you will lose this right, but until it is your right to collect that rent. Next one is when ownership has passed on the buyer from the seller before payment of money in full, claim the amount from the buyer that is due to him. However, in certain cases what happens that you just given the possession of the property, but the buyer hasn't paid you the all amount. So it is your right to demand the remaining amount from the buyer. Now the next topic is what are the duties or liabilities of a buyer. The buyer is bound to disclose to the seller any fact which would materially enhance the value of the property. Otherwise it becomes fraudulent. It means that though this property belongs to you, but the buyer has more knowledge about that property regarding the value and anything. In such a condition, it is buyer's liability or duty to tell you the real value of that property. Next one is to pay or tender the price at the time and place to complete the sale. He may adjust prepaid or earnest money if any. It is saying that whatever the price discussed, that is agreed upon, he is liable to pay that. And at the same time, when the property has passed to the buyer becomes liable for any loss or destruction to the property. So it means that once you have given the possession along with all the documents, then whatever happened with that property, any loss or of anything of such type, then it is buyer who is responsible for this. The last point is the buyer should pay public charges and rents which may become payable after the ownership passed to the buyer. What does it mean that? It means simply that once you have taken the property, every formality is completed, then all the liabilities regarding the tax and all, now it's your duty to pay that. So this is the duties and liabilities of a buyer. Now, what are the rights of a buyer? The buyer is entitled to any benefit and increase in the value, rents, etc. after the property has passed on to him. So once you bought the property, of course, whatever the things happening with that, whether it is loss or benefit, you are going to be responsible for that and you are going to be benefited out of that accordingly. The next one is the buyer has a charge on the advances made in anticipation of the delivery and for interest on such advances. What does it mean that? Suppose to buy a property you have given the advance and seller just delaying the things. In such a condition you have right to demand the interest on the amount that you already paid as advance money. So that is your right. So this is all about the sale. Now let's check out the case. In order to appreciate this case, you need to recall certain points that we have discussed in our previous video. The case name is Madam Pillai versus Badar Kali. What happened in this case was wife claimed maintenance to her husband. So what husband did, he just transferred certain property which value was less than 100 rupees, keep in mind. And husband transferred that property orally. No written things, no registry is done. Later on what husband did, he sold out that property to third person. So the plaintiff, that is the wife of that person, filed a title suit and claimed that she is the owner of that property, though there is no registration on this property. And the defendant claimed that since registry is not done, so she has no right on that property. But court has given judgment in favor of that lady, because as we have discussed that if the property is less than 100 rupees, then it is optional whether you make it either oral or written. So there is not essentially required to make the registry of that property if it is less than 100 rupees. So keep in mind. So regarding that, this case decided in favor of that lady. So this is all for the topic sale, and I believe you must understood what is meaning of sale, what is the valid elements of this sale, and who is the seller, who is the buyer, what is the rights, basically what are the rights of a buyer and a seller, what are the duties of a buyer as well as seller. So everything we have discussed under this video. So see you in next video.